At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you. Black Friday deals are going on all month long. Save up to 45% off site-wide plus an additional 10% off every order right now at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government love the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a professor of political science at Oklahoma Christian University, and I am joined by my friend and colleague, Dr. Ken Katkin, a professor of law at Chase Law School. Ken, welcome to the supporters exclusive and inaugural Federalist Papers overview.
It is great to be back.
So, yeah, well, listen, I am rarely as excited as I am right now about what we are initiating today. We are starting a brand new, who knows how long this is going to take us, but who cares? Because we're going to have fun the whole time. We are taking you through, and I'm going to pull up for those of you who are watching. We're going to be going through the Federalist Papers, and we're going to be talking about Hamilton and Jay and Madison and all the rest. And that's a blast for me. This is one of my areas, and so that's really exciting. And so what we're going to be doing is each week we're going to be going through a series of the documents, and we're going to be kind of highlighting on that. And this week, what we're going to start off with is we're going to begin with an overview discussion of the origins of the Federalist Papers, where they came from, how they came to be, and then we're going to get into the author's own introduction to them, their own series in number 1. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. So I'm really excited for you to start this new journey with Ken and myself as we go through the Federalist Papers. So the other thing I want to point out to listeners is that, and I'll be including this in the show notes, there is going to be a companion Substack for this show. And one of the big reasons for that is there's going to be more detail than we can always get into in the show. And additionally, there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to be talking about that require citations. And there's not easy ways to verbally cite. And so I would love for listeners, that way you're going to have an access to a lot deeper, you can explore more of these this content as we go along each time Ken and I are on the show. So be aware, I'll have a link to the Substack there where that goes through, and we'll always be linking to that episode's particular Substack as we make it through. So join us along on both here on the podcast and on Substack. I'm really excited about that, and that's what we're going to be doing. So Ken, I guess we should no more delay. Let's get into the Federalist Papers. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay. So as Clinton Rossiter puts it in his now very famous introduction, the Federalist is the most important work in political science that has ever been written or is likely ever to be written in the United States. And there is truth. I mean, is that hyperbole? A little bit, but is there truth there? Absolutely, right? There's a centerpiece, and in large part so, for those of you not familiar with American history, it's because the current Constitution that we have, I don't want to say that it owes all of its life to the Federalist Papers. However, it is not an understatement to say that the Federalist Papers were a crucial element in ensuring that the United States Constitution was adopted. So a little bit of background for listeners. Recall that in the wake of the Revolutionary War, we had begun intermittently to use what we now call the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation were the Constitution for the burgeoning colonies, but they didn't last very long, although we used them longer than they lasted, in part because it took so long for them to be ratified themselves. But they were very different than the Constitution that as a matter of fact, that we've already provided commentary on in an earlier set of podcasts. And as a result, there were many who thought that the Articles of Confederation needed to be revised, and that leads to the Constitutional Convention. And after a lot of closed doors compromise, probably something that would not have happened the way that we think of it today, where it was all going to be in the public sphere, there was a chance for people to be thoughtful and a chance for people to change positions without flip-flopping as well. By flip-flopping, verbally being seen that way. You finally have a final text for the Constitution on September 17th, 1787. Now, the process isn't over because the document required ratification. And one of the things that we've talked about before is keep in mind that there's some revolutionariness going on here. The Constitutional Convention was not really a constitutional convention. It was a convention to amend the Articles of Confederation. But the gentlemen who showed up, although they disagreed about a lot of things, they didn't disagree that we need to, or most of them didn't disagree, vast majority of them didn't disagree, that we needed a new constitutional structure. So they actually went beyond the scope of their call for this text. And they also did something else. I always tell my students it's one of the sneakiest parts of the Constitution. It's Article 7. The Articles of Confederation had required all of the states to agree to amendments and changes to the Articles of Confederation. The likelihood of that happening stood at somewhere around 0. It was never going to happen. And so Article 7 actually outlined its own ratification process. As a matter of fact, what it says is, quote, "The ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states, so ratifying the same." So 9 versus all 13, that's a radically different proposition. And that's what leads to these really intense state-level political conflicts at those ratifying conventions. And it's out of that moment that we're going to end up with the Federalist Papers being produced for newspapers to support the text of the Constitution against other possibilities, which is either to stick with the Articles, to go back and revise this, to have something else where you're just revising the Articles of Confederation. So this is the environment in which we're getting into. So Ken, what do you talk about in that era of, here we are, here we have this text, it's contested, and yet it has this lower bar now, which is itself now contested, but because of the choices of the of the Articles of Confederation's Congress, the individual states are going to make determinations about this, and these ratifying conventions become the thing, and we get just a ton of ink being spilt over this. So where do you take on that front?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Anti-Federalists actually got going first with the spilling a ton of ink on it. So part of the project of the Federalist Papers was to respond to these attacks on the Constitution that were being published in the New York papers, and that's part of the reason. Hamilton and Madison and Jay, when they got around to writing the Federalist Papers, they always signed them under the pseudonym Publius. But part of the reason they used a Roman pseudonym was that the Anti-Federalists were already doing that under the names Cato and Brutus, and so they're kind of responding to that. So yeah, once the Constitution, once the political movement to try to get a new Constitution ratified is permeating out to the public, once there's any public awareness that this is going on, the Anti-Federalists, are opposed to it for a variety of reasons that they publish, and so the Federalist Papers they're intended to be they gave themselves a pace even a little heavier than we give ourselves at the Politics Guys. They wanted to try to publish more than one a week in the New York papers, and they got that going. So that's all part of that moment in time that you were talking about.
Well, and I think it's hard to overstate. Today when you approach the Constitution, especially when we're talking to fellow Americans on the show, right? Not exclusively. Thank you, our overseas listeners, but many of you are. And so I think for most people, left and right, there is a degree of reverence for the Constitution. And so it is hard. It's discongruous when you actually recognize the history here, which is that it was not universally revered at the outset, and not like in like little kind of nice ways, but vehemently disagreed with. That is something I have students read in my own classes, right? So, for example, Patrick Henry is a great example of this. He called it the tyranny of Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
arguing that effectively what they were doing was the same thing that King George had done, right? He compared the Constitutional Convention in the text to giving up your liberties and rights. And he is not alone on this front. It is called by one scholar the most vile collection of trash that has ever been put out. I mean, think about that. I mean, today, if somebody were to say, man, the Constitution, that's the most vile of trash ever. I mean, they'd get run out of the union. I don't care what party you're in, you'd get run out, right? There would be problems with that. So when you think about the anti-federal, or who we end up calling the anti-federalist, which is a unique conversation as well. When you get to who ends up being called the anti-federalists, they are very explicitly coming at it. And you're right. You get Cato, you get Brutus, you have John DeWitt, you have the Federal Farmer.
Yeah.
Just this overwhelming number. Now, behind those individuals, probably we have guys like George Clinton, who was very much a staunch kind of leader in what ends up being the anti-federalist. You have Robert Yates. It's also worth recognizing that the reason they both have the name, Federalist and anti-federalist, is because both of them considered themselves to be the Federalists, right? So anti-federalists, they thought the Federalists were actually the nationalists, right? The monarchists, and that's how they labeled them.
Yeah.
And the Federalists labeled the anti-federalists because they were against, the federal
having a federal republic. Yeah,
exactly. And so really, it's also telling that sometimes the winners write history, that we continue to refer to them as the Federalist and the anti-federalist. Because so for example, if you grab your anti-federalist papers and you take a look at them, nowhere do they ever call themselves, well, I the Federal Farmer, right?
Yeah.
So, you have all that language things going on. And so in response to that, you're absolutely right. Hamilton, he's got to get involved. He's got to make this happen. And it's also unique. There could have been more writers to this project, but I think Ken, kind of the same way, these projects, they sound really good and then life gets in the way. That's kind of what ends up happening here, because initially, if we listen to the voices of Madison who talks about this, it's actually likely that there would have been more individuals writing for the Federalist Papers than actually ended up. Hamilton and Jay are actually who joined together first and try to link some others in, but really it ends up falling on Hamilton and Madison, because although Jay is in for it, he ends up effectively having what we would call a really significant rheumatoid arthritis flare, and you can't type. There's no voice to text, and so he effectively has to stop writing after 5. He just can't keep going. Now, to his credit, here's another little historical factoid. Madison himself was chronically ill. He almost undoubtedly had either what I have or something related to it. He called it bilious disease, but really from reports, he probably either had fistulizing Crohn's disease, or at least Crohn's disease, or ulcerative colitis combined with another kind of autoimmune disorder. So he was, and this is an era where you don't have quite toilets the way that you do, and so traveling is tough. And so, imagine having to be shocked all the time, and you got to go out and you got to poop out in a ditch, 13,000 times, and it's awful. You're trying to move around. But despite that, he's still going to end up writing 29 essays, or about 75,000 words. Although Hamilton will do a lot, we got to kind of keep in mind, Madison did a ton, especially considering what he was coming from. So I guess that kind of gets us to the crux of this is, why do you think they end up, Hamilton and Madison are very different individuals. They're different parts of the pole, Ken. But here they are collaborating. Let's talk about that a little bit.
I actually wanted to, before we even get to that, I wanted to talk about Hamilton and Jay, because you mentioned,
please, yes.
Hamilton and Jay started this project, but they were maybe a little too politically aligned with each other. I think they needed a bigger tent, and they were just from the same part of the party, and they were neighbors too. So like Hamilton and Jay, they lived in Upper Manhattan, north of Columbia University, when that was still a farming area. So they both lived on farms up there. Hamilton Grange is still there. It's like the only farmhouse left in Manhattan. And they were, Hamilton and Jay were fairly strong nationalizers. And you kind of alluded to that the anti-federalists, the people we today would call the anti-federalists, are looking at Hamilton and Jay's ideas kind of the way some people today might look at Trump's ideas and saying, it's just these guys want too much power, and so but they really want the government to have a lot of power. Hamilton and Jay also, have a lot of friends in Wall Street. Like, they're very integrated with the financial world, and they want, the federal government to play a big role in that. They want there to be a central bank. They want the Treasury Department to intervene in the economy. And, a lot of that kind of stuff is seen as dangerous by the anti-federalists. So Hamilton and Jay have this partnership, but I think Hamilton in particular realized, he doesn't want to just preach to the converted. Like, he has to have a bigger group of people arguing for the ratification of the Constitution, so that they can reach, other people, besides, New York financial world types. And so Madison, he's a prominent Virginia politician. He's, I guess you'd probably call him, center right by today's standards, whereas you'd probably call Hamilton, center left, I think, by today's standards, probably. And so they have a little bit of different policy views. Madison, I think, wants a little bit more limitations on the power of the new government than Hamilton does. Hamilton certainly wants a very energetic government, and Madison does too, but he wants more constraints on it. I think Madison has more of the idea that it needs to be a very energetic government in certain limited spheres, such as its ability to provide for the common defense or to establish an internal free trade zone within the United States, but that it doesn't need to be governing every aspect of life and things like that. So they do have a little bit of political differences, but they both are strong supporters of the new Constitution, and so it makes sense that they end up pooling their forces to write these editorials. And Hamilton remained the more energetic one, despite the diseases that you talked about. He wrote more than twice as many Federalist Papers as Madison did, but Madison wrote some of the most influential ones. So I think in terms of which ones we read today, it's probably more likely that people who only are familiar with a few Federalist Papers would be familiar with some of the ones that Madison wrote than the ones that Hamilton wrote. So that's sort of, I don't know if that covers what you're asking, but that's
yeah. Well, I think the other thing, as we think about these and we read these, the ways in which we write have changed significantly too, right? So again, we keep talking about these as being essays, but keep in mind, we don't mean essays probably in the way that contemporary listeners mean. We mean newspaper articles, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's hard for many to really wrap their head around, like, you pick up this book, and no matter what format you get it in, it's a book. It's a pretty thick book. And to tell somebody, that was a serial, right, in New York papers is a shock. And when they're not uber long, but they are far longer than what we would anticipate encountering today. And so the other element we have to think about here, and a lot of scholars talk about this is the prime era of text. Text is the mode of communication. And so we have this huge number coming from the anti-federalist first, or as we said, and then we get these responses. As a matter of fact, Madison may not have necessarily joined into the project had it not been for how many attacks he saw from anti-federalists based on his own writings. He didn't really want to weigh in. He was a little concerned about that, but then he finally just got fed up. He's like, well, I may not agree with everything here in the Constitution, and he did take issue with a few items, but I can't let these charges go undone. And the other thing you had mentioned that's really important is the speed at which they're writing this length also means that the writing itself is going to be a little bit unique. And even at the time that comes out, right? A prominent anti-federalist says at the time, Publius has already written 26 numbers, as much as would jade the brain of any poor sinner, so that in decency he should now rest on his arms, right? And that wasn't alone, right? This is fact. And it'd be funny if we could go back and ask him at the time, hey, by the way, there's about another 50 coming. Are you, 59 coming? Are you ready for that?
Yeah. Yeah, they tried to publish them on Wednesdays and Saturdays. They did get the first 7 published between October 27th and November 17th in 1787. So they kept up a pace. And also, when you said print is king back then, yeah, I mean, just to give the listeners the concept of this, there were so many newspapers being published in New York City that although the Federalist Papers, the Wednesday-Saturday schedule was for one of them called the Independent Journal, but this was actually, these were being reprinted in half a dozen other New York City papers. So it's like they're coming out in the Independent Journal, but also in the General Advertiser, and also in the New York Packet, and also in the Daily Advertiser, and also in the Daily Patriotic Register. So it's like they just thought, like, to reach the audience, you got to have the same essays printed in all the different papers that people are reading. And there were probably a dozen more that they weren't, being printed in, but there were like half a dozen just in New York that published all these essays. And there actually are textual differences. So for modern scholars who publish these things, if you see that the papers were published in 6 newspapers and you actually carefully read them, the words are not the same in all the 6 newspapers. There's all these minor wording differences. And then also there started to be collections of them published in book form just a few years later, and the wording somewhat changes again. And there's some I think, controversy about which of those wording changes reflect Hamilton's own final edits versus which ones, might have just been done by people working at the book publishers and things like that.
Yeah, there's a matter of fact, the ordering that we have now comes from the collection as a book, as opposed to the actual ordering that came out. And what we know from Hamilton and Madison is that they allowed there to be some editing when that happened, especially Hamilton was aware of that editing, and to put them into better order. If you take a look at the preface to the original publication of the books, Hamilton even points out, hey, there was a lot there was a lot that happened here, and it probably, forgive me, it's a little messy in a sense, is what the preface is getting at, if I wanted to put it into modern language.
Yeah, and just to add to your point about him editing, the actual title of the book, so the book was first published in 1788 by a publisher named Maclean. And if you looked at the cover of the book, the name of the book was The Federalist, a collection of essays written in favor of the new Constitution by a citizen of New York, corrected by the author with additions and alterations. So Hamilton labeling himself as a citizen of New York, he's still being pseudonymous, but he's saying he made additions and alterations in the text in that edition compared to the ones that were originally published in the newspapers.
Now, the other really fun scholarly puzzle that happened that we need to think about here is, because they're all published under Publius, and even there where you start getting hints of who it is, all of the authors had agreed in advance that they were not going to allow others to know who had written what. Now, we do know that they each, because of the speed that we've been talking about, because of that speed, each man was writing one. As a matter of fact, as Madison put it, he said, though publication is carried on in concert, the writers are not mutually answerable for all the ideas of each other. There seldom being time for even a perusal of the pieces by any but the writer himself, right? So it's just coming out as fast as we can. And there's, matter of fact, for listeners who want to get even more in detail into this, I would highly recommend Ron Chernow's book on Hamilton, where he has a whole chapter dedicated just to the pace and the speed from Hamilton's side. And then if you're interested, there's others for Madison, but a good readable for anybody. You don't have to be a scholar. Ron Chernow is a very accessible author. So we have this, but that leads to this puzzle, which ended up being, well, who wrote which ones, right? So who had it? And as a result, there were originally a couple of different possibilities. Even today, some scholars, even though I think pretty much we have I would say we have 100% consensus, there are still a few out there who now debate a little bit about this. But it results as because right before his death, Hamilton might have, although there's some dispute about this too, published a list in which he obviously claims for himself some of the pieces written by Madison, including 49 through 48 and 62 and 63. Of course, we don't get to that. Now, James Madison will also eventually publish a list after his presidency. Now, what's curious, which is a little puzzle, Madison at the time did write to Jefferson in code about who wrote which ones like contemporaneously. Although to my best of my understanding, we don't understand that code. And as a result, we still, so we assume it's the same as the one that he publishes during his presidency, but we can't access that. And so as a result of this, really, the scholarly consensus is that Madison's list is correct and that the 12 disputed essays belong to his authorship and not to Hamilton's. And so what that brings us to is 51 for Hamilton, 29 for Madison, and 5 for John Jay. But I mean, there was a good century of debate about figuring the details out of those. I don't know if that's something you've gone into.
Yeah, I mean, I've read about that debate. I do have the numbers of the one, and I think there's 3 more besides the ones that it was maybe 18 through 20 were also contested.
Well,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know any deeper than what you just said. I accept everything that you said is correct, but I haven't studied deeper into that.
So the other thing about the Federalists that's going to make our go through them unique is we really have to recognize that they're doing 4 things, right? They are trying to respond to, well, one, they're explaining the blessings of the Constitution, right? They're trying to say, here's why the Constitution's a good thing. But they're also indicting the Articles of Confederation, because one potential easy solution for the anti-federalist is to simply say, hey, we got through a war with the Articles of Confederation. What's the rush? We can keep working under the framework of the Articles of Confederation. Although there's this crisis coming, that's manufactured by y'all. We don't have to think about that. So they're also going to be indicting the Articles of Confederation in their problems with that. And I mean, the other bit of here is they're going to be trying to talk about, federalism is a brand new concept in many ways. It had not been practiced quite like this. So they're going to be dealing with that. And then finally, at some of the essays, there's these moments where it kind of separates itself from the pragmatic debate. And it's, especially with Madison, there's going to be these moments of philosophical, like, here's this broader concept. Let's think about, like, I'm thinking of number 10, right? So number 10, as we get to that, is it related to a pragmatic problem? Yes, but it ends up transcending that problem more so than, say, like 49, because it really thinks about the questions of majorities and how should majorities work. And so sometimes we have these brief philosophical goes, but it is worth knowing that the Federalist Papers are not primarily they're not political philosophy, right? They're pragmatic politics out of which we get some political philosophy, which leads me to an interesting observation, Ken. In that sense, do you think that they are in some ways a culmination of conservative thought? Because conservative thought, I mean, ideologically conservative thought says that the best thinking comes out of the pragmatism of the moment and not out of, right, the long-term, abstract thinking of the philosopher. What do you think about? I mean, are the Federalist Papers conservative in that sense? Does that make sense?
Well, I'm happy to have conservatives think that, because that will make conservatives be more comfortable with them. But I don't agree with it. No, I think Hamilton, as we said, wrote the large majority of them, and Hamilton's vision of government, I think would be, to the left of Barack Obama, in terms of how activist he wants the government to be. And so I think the idea that the government should be very engaged in trying to make life better for the people, and that, laissez-faire is not a good approach, kind of infuses the Federalist Papers. So I don't see that as conservative in that sense. I think it's a blueprint for an empowered government that can play an active role in trying to help people live better lives.
Well, let's get into the first Federalist Paper then.
Okay.
That brings us to the end of our ad-supported preview. And that was an extended version. So normally, you're just going to get a few minutes of this show, but I really wanted you to get a whole feel for the introduction to the Federalist Papers. Now, in the rest of this episode, Ken and myself, we're going to go in to number 1, and we'd love for you to be there from the very first. But to do that, you have to be a supporter of the Politics Guy. So go ahead, head to the show notes right now and click on support and become a supporter. Unlock the rest of this episode. Unlock the rest of the Federalist Paper number 1. But not just that, unlock the rest of this entire series. If that's not enough, don't forget, the moment you become a supporter, you also get Ken and I's complete constitutional commentary. That's right, Ken and myself completed the entire Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So if you would like to go back and get all of that content as well, all you have to do is head to the show notes and become a supporter, or head to politicsguys.com/support and sign up now. We'd love to have you. You can also always head to patreon.com/politicsguys. There are so many other advantages to becoming a supporter. It includes access to our Discord group, and it includes access to us on Slack, depending on if you get that level. So many options, so many things. I don't have time for it all. So I'll just again remind you, you're going to get the rest of the Federalist Papers because that's why you're here. Or you're also going to get all of our Constitution and Bill of Rights shows, plus so much more. So head to the show notes, become a supporter, head to politicsguys.com/support. If you're not in place to support this Politics Guys, you can always email us at mail@politicsguys.com. Don't forget that rating and subscribing are huge, and you'll notice that we have now been putting out short little reels. We'd love for you to share those video reels with your friends. That makes all the difference in the world. But I'm going to stop right there and say, go ahead, subscribe to the Politics Guys. I think you're really going to find it worthwhile. And I know that there are some individuals who have found it so worthwhile that they reach out to us every month to really make this show work with their dollars. And that are the executive producers. And thank you guys so much for that. They are Wilmer Marino, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, and Jody Miller. We'll be back with a full episode this weekend on the news of the day. As always, I hope you'll join us then.